Lorwyn. Chapter 13. As Sig launched his charges downriver, Rhys tumbled to the smooth, glassy surface of the Shapewater ferry and became entangled in Marelen's arms and legs. Before the two of them, one awake and one still blissfully out of it, came to rest against the lip of a concave saucer. He checked the Monsong's pulse, and it was steady. She had not been struck with any arrows. She simply refused to regain consciousness. Bridget, the only one of them to keep her footing when the cruise had begun with a jolt, sidled over to him and offered the elf a hand up.
"Hasn't she been out a long time?" the Kifkin asked.
"Maybe," Rhys said, allowing the stocky archer to pull him to his feet. He immediately had to grasp the cool, spongy lip of the ferry as they entered a patch of tiny whitecaps, kicked up by the winds coming down off of the Tanfell Plateau. "I don't know how much longer she can be out safely. She's the first Monsong I've had much to do with. This might be a healing trance among her people." To his surprise, Ashling was standing. He thought for a second, and then the reason became obvious. If she sat down like they did, she'd be much closer to the water. It must have taken tremendous courage for her to set foot upon the glass-like ferry. He shot her a wave, and she glanced over one flaming shoulder as she dropped into a crouch.
"Hold on," she called. "Has that occurred to you?" Bridget continued. "Your Monsong here might be injured on the inside. She was in a giant's fist when he hit the ground. Could be bleeding out on the inside. Would explain her pallor."
"She was already pale, but I think you might be right," Rhys agreed. The elf stood and set his feet apart a few more inches to stabilize himself as he peered at Marelen's unmoving face. It was the color of marrow-spun porcelain. "Bog it," he said, as the Shapewater ride hit a rough patch. Rhys dropped into a crouch like one Ashling had assumed and still held, doing her best to avoid any contact with moisture. The tips of Rhys's fingers could still detect the pulse of blood through Marelen's veins, but it was definitely running at a slower pace than just a few moments earlier.
"She's an elf," Bridget said confidently. "What's so strange about her? No offense, but one elf looks a lot like any other to me."
"Besides the ears," Rhys said, "or the horns, or the fact that she's a half-head taller than even me."
"She dresses differently than you," the Kifkin said. "Classier. That counts for something among elves, doesn't it?"
"Do not mock me, hero of Kinsbale," Rhys said, "and that is besides the point."
"No offense intended." The Kifkin eyed the unconscious woman clinically. "Ask me, she looks like mountain stock. Thick and hearty." "Really thick," Ileona piped up. "If by thick you mean fat," Visa agreed.
"This isn't getting us anywhere," Rhys retorted.
"What's going on back there?" Ashling called, all of her attention and concentration required to keep her on 2 feet. "Is everyone all right?" "Is she dying?" asked Ileona hopefully.
The clique had long since given up on trying to find a way through the blue bubble that enclosed them. Visa and Endry joined her, and all three crowded around Marelen's pale face.
"It sure does look like she's dying,"
said Visa.
"Well, I guess we won't be learning any more about that mystery," Endry said. "Let's toss her over the side."
"Nobody is tossing anyone anywhere." Rhys leaned forward to wave the trio away as Ashling gingerly stepped forward.
"I'd like to try something," she said. "I might be able to help."
Rhys felt his brow furrow. "Might?"
"I'm not fully trained as a healer," Ashling said, "but I've got plenty of experience when it comes to seeking out the elementals. Maralen here was recently touched by one, and if the elk spirit left behind even a small trace of its power—" Her voice trailed off and she shrugged. "I might be able to learn what's wrong with her, so that we know what kind of healing magic to seek out." "You're not fooling anyone, Pilgrim," Bridget chided playfully. "You just want to pick our brains about the elk."
"That too," Ashling said, "but I think doing so will help us help her. With your permission, Rhys, I would like to try."
"Do it," Ileona chirped. "She's full of secrets, that one. Poking around in her brain can't help, and it might hurt." You've got it backwards, Ileona. No, I didn't. The largest fairy smiled sharply.
Reese sighed. We have no other good options. Proceed, pilgrim, but tread lightly. Ashling half stumbled and half walked to the rear of the shapewater disc, fighting the disorientating effect of the watery blue bubble enveloping them, and ending her short attempt at lateral movement by colliding with Reese. The elf clutched the lip of the saucer with one hand and wrapped the other around Ashling's arm. The flames on her bare, coal-like skin engulfed his arm up to the elbow, but there was no heat.
I'm all right, Ashling said, pulling her arm gently away from Reese's grip and shifting onto one knee.
She let out a soft hiss when her knee made contact with the wet surface of the ferry, but the pain appeared only momentary. There was a second hiss as the flamekin dropped onto her other knee so that she could remain upright while holding both of her hands over Maralen's torso. Reese placed an arm around the unconscious woman's shoulders to keep her from rocking around, as the shapewater ferry thumped and bounced. He was certain Seg could have given them a smoother ride if he'd had the time to prepare, but at the moment, speed was much more important than comfort. The flames around Ashling's hands changed colour, slightly at first, but soon more intensely as the flamekin's eyes grew bright. The flames settled into a light, scintillating blue that spread from Ashling's palms to envelop Maralen's torso. Just as it had engulfed the end of Reese's arms, the flame flickered differently, however almost as if it were burning down instead of up. At certain points, as Reese had suspected, those points were along the ribs. The flames glowed more brightly than others. A flash of a different sort caught his attention then. The blue of the Merrow's magic protective bubble reflected in Maralen's dark eyes as they blinked open. Her eyes immediately locked with his, and Reese felt an exhilarating wave of relief. The wave lasted long enough to crash against the sharp and unforgiving walls of reality. In a flash of blue and a sudden shower of icy raindrops, the shapewater energy bubble surrounding the ferry burst. Ashling winced and swore as thousands of droplets sizzled against her skin and the strange fire she manipulated. But neither Flamekin nor Blue Flame was in danger of being extinguished. The Flamekin felt her body melt away from her mind as she plunged deep into Maralen's trance-like state. The strange elf had indeed been brushed by a powerful ancient magic, but it was not like any Ashling was familiar with, barely recognizable as the presence of a primal spirits, if indeed that was what it was. The great elk spirit had been somber, its presence a huge pressing weight, but Maralen did not seem burdened by it. It was quite unlike the aura Ashling had got from her own elemental, which was lighter, faster, and sharper. Ashling's perceptions had descended, or ascended depending on one's point of view, beyond the rigid structures of language, shapes, and structures. Instead, the pilgrims saw colours, energy, and light, little fractal pieces of living soul within the strange elf whose life rested in Ashling's hands. She had never seen a life force like Maralen's. The elemental energies that glittered across her mindscape were strange, and stranger still was the manner in which they interacted with Maralen. The elf woman's strangely muted aura was the brightest around her ribs, lungs, and heart. Perhaps Maralen was healing herself as she slept. Frustrated, Ashling pressed harder, trying to catch a glimpse of the stranger's inner mind. She felt herself being pushed away as Maralen's mind asserted control. Reese needn't have worried about treading lightly. Maralen's secrets were entirely safe from the pilgrim. Then the strange elf's eyes snapped open. "Hello," the patient croaked as she regained consciousness and intruded on Ashling's thoughts. "I'm fine now, and you're making me uncomfortably warm." "Shh," the Flamekin replied. She rushed to gather as much from the elf woman's mind as she could before Marilen's waking thoughts grew clear enough to break their connection.
Conserve your strength, and don't break the connection.
Marilen's aura grew stronger and brighter as Ashling spoke. The elf woman's black eyes widened a bit, and she scowled in frustration, but finally let her head loll back against the smooth shapewater.
Reese? The Morn Song said weakly. Is he there?
Yes, Ashling said.
And that is your last question, please. You will be all right, but only if you let me concentrate. Thank you, no, Maralen said. I am feeling much better now.
She sat up, the form-fitting sheath of fire around her torso moving with her. With a definite, hard blink of her eyes, Maralen severed her connection with Ashling.
She's alive? Bridget said. Oh, pooh, said Ileana. It's not too late to chuck her overboard, is it? Let's tie her to a rock and use her as an anchor.
Reese turned towards the front of the shapewater craft and shouted, Captain, we're all present and accounted for. Great news, the Mirror Captain replied, because we just got to the shortcut. Reese shot a wary glance at Ashling and saw the blue flame enveloping Maralen glowing brighter, brighter still, until it slowly subsided. The flamekin sighed in exhaustion, and the Mornsong elf pulled her feet under her and rose on unsteady legs. Reese heard a strange, terrified whoop from Captain Sig. A moment later, he felt the shapewater saucer tip forward, slowly at first, but gradually the incline grew steeper and more problematic. What? Reese said again. Ashling's eyes, aimed directly forward, glowed orange with fear or fury the elf could not tell, but as the ferry continued to roll over the lip of the waterfall, it quickly became apparent that the feeling was fear. Reese could imagine little that would terrify a being of pure flame more than a sudden drop over a waterfall, plummeting nose first into a dank, dark underground river, protected only by the sudden appearance of a shapewater bubble, riding along on a ferry made of that same shapewater and held in place solely by the willpower of an eccentric Mero.